just for giving a background to the talk as well as the Coopathon initiative. The conversation around technology and innovation and more technology infusion into the cooperative ecosystem is something that we are currently looking at, and we are currently encouraging very much among the ICAP members as well as the larger cooperative ecosystem as well. So we would like to speak the language of innovation and technology, and how we can make sure that we are future ready. We are making sure that cooperatives are ready to face the fourth industrial revolution as it comes. So here we look at cooperatives as the new vehicle or an aspirational institution which can venture into newer sectors and newer niche technology fields, such as even fintech, blockchain, open source technology. We already have numerous examples, such as platform cooperatives, where there has been proven examples of how the cooperative model itself has been strengthened, empowered, and successful by leveraging technology as a alternative to larger institutions that have been traditionally large corporations or even startups. How cooperatives can be agile by themselves while still retaining the 7 cooperative principles and also the ownership of each of the stakeholders who themselves are members as well as employees. So more relevant is this particular year when we are organizing both this webinar and the Coopathon, because this is the 25th year of the Cooperative Identity Statement, which was adopted in the year 1995. And also this year marks 125 years since the inception of the organization into the International Cooperative Alliance. We also mark 60 years of inception of the International Cooperative Alliance Asia Pacific office and the ventures that we have been undertaking in this area among our members, governments, or other stakeholders as well. So here we are here to speak about the importance of technology and how this can be leveraged, how this will resonate with the newer technological advancements in the field, the younger generation, and also even be a vehicle for entrepreneurship rather than just newer models being thought of as startups or business enterprises. How cooperatives as an enterprise with stakeholdership and resilience. Cooperatives have always been resilient structures or faced crises, whether it be the crisis in 2008-9, the crisis before that, even the COVID crisis. They have always shown that they are resilient vehicles and enterprises that keep people first and also take care of all their stakeholders in terms of social security, jobs, skilling, and so on. So this is the larger aspect with which we are trying to host this webinar and also the Coopathon initiative. I would just like to say 1 or 2 lines about the Coopathon as well. We are organizing a hackathon for the cooperative ecosystem. It is open to anyone from the Asia Pacific region to register and participate. It is a fully online hackathon from December 11th to December 14th, a 74-hour hackathon, where, it is ideally kept in the weekend so that we would encourage even working professionals, innovators, startup entrepreneurs, and even young students to participate and give innovative solutions that can be anything relating to a collective enterprise. It does not necessarily have to end up, as starting as a cooperative. It can be a solution itself. It can be a process-based solution, or it can be a technological innovation as well. The focus, the larger theme of the Coopathon is technology and cooperative identity. And the focus sectors are the social and services sectors. These are the 2 sectors that have been badly hit by the entire COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, if we can have innovative solutions coming together and showing solutions as collective enterprises, that can be the best resilient problem-solving mechanism for solving a lot of problems that humanity faces at this point. So with this note, I hand over to Moses and Joel, our speakers for today.
All right. Thank you, Ganesh. Thanks a lot. Great. So Joel is also here. I also have a few of my community members. Thanks guys for joining. Okay, so let's start. Oh, cool. So we'll be talking about data ownership and cooperative or community economy. What started off as data ownership and gig economy, like 7-8 months ago, working with Bharat Inclusion Research Foundation. So BIRF is an arm of CIIE, which is by Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. So they basically what they try to do is fund researchers, and part of funding is also to take them to the level of building solutions for the Bharat, right? So the Bharat is essentially the lowest 250 million households in India, which is essentially thriving on less than $5 a month, $5 a day, right? So that's where we started doing this research, and while talking to industry experts, we stumbled upon platform Co-op. We talked to Trebor, and Trebor put us in touch with Seva Co-op, and then Saloni from there put us in touch with Mohit and Ganesh, and here we are. Right. So our way of looking at the world, the way of looking at the product that we were envisioning and we were building has also evolved over time based on our interaction with industry people, based on our interaction with the gig worker. So the core is still the gig worker. A gig worker is anyone. It could be a daily wage farm laborer. It could be someone like me who is, considered the knowledge economy gig worker, or Joel, who's also a gig worker, right? So any individual who is not tied to a traditional employee-employer relationship is termed as a gig worker, at least based on the Indian government's draft labor policy, right? So with that as the context, so I just explained gig worker is the core, but we are not trying to build a gig economy because that's what the mainstream, this mainstream media, mainstream markets is essentially thinking about, right? The future of work is gig economy, but there's a better way to structure this whole thing, which is what we are going to see now. Now, it's better to start with someone who has written a book about this, who I personally respect, and a lot of you would also respect. So this is Raghuram Rajan. Raghuram Rajan is currently a professor at Chicago School of Booth School of Business. He was the IMF chief economist, director of research. He was also the governor of Reserve Bank of India, which is the Federal Reserve equivalent of India. So he talks about, the book that he has written is called The Third Pillar, where he talks about how the state and the markets leave the communities behind. I think that'll be a good place to start. So we'll start with that, then we get into the definitions of that. He talks about communities related to spaces, how decentralization of governance should happen within India. So India, if you look at it as a space-based community, within that you can like drill it down to like states, districts, cities, wards, and ward level is the the single most governance equivalent within the Indian governance structure, right? So he talks about from that angle, but we'll be looking at other ways of thinking about communities, and a good place to start would be skill. We'll define why. Then we'll get into community definition from our research and talking to co-ops. Then we'll envision an ideal community platform, and that in turn comes from our primary research, and we are also building few communities. So the logos that you see here, which is Quantum Computing India, Stop Being Boring. So these are all few communities / co-ops that we are building. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So that will be the overall flow. So first, we are going to listen to Raghuram Rajan talk about third pillar and the need for communities being reinvigorated.
Why is it that people are angry? Not just because they saw the global financial crisis and they saw that, the elite looked after themselves, but also because they feel that the future is less good for their children than it was for them. This is a big change in the world because the history of the last 200 years has always been one of progress. We're now coming face to face with the possibility of regress. I think we need to think deeply about what is going wrong, why the system worked for 60 or 70 years and then stopped working, and how we set it back on track. And that requires fundamental change. It's not about markets, it's not about government, it is about fundamentally restructuring the social contract that we have. How we get the services and the activity to the areas where they're disappearing. So the three pillars are really the pillars that hold up society. One hand, there's the political pillar, there is the economic pillar, and then there is the societal or sociological pillar, communities, people, democracy. And together, these pillars essentially make our society what it is. What happens when one or two pillars get overly strong is that it creates an imbalance. And that imbalance has to be rectified either by strengthening some other pillar or by weakening the existing pillars. And throughout history, we've had serious imbalances emerging either because of dramatic calamity like the Black Death or because of scientific or technological advances such as the first or the second industrial revolution. And I argue we're going through something similar today, a technological revolution, which essentially is strengthening markets tremendously, but also strengthening governments at the same time. And what is being left behind is the third pillar, the community.
All right. So I think that's a good prelude to what we're trying to achieve. So if you remember the diagram that showed capital, labor, which is the market, and the state, right? So now let's quickly get into the definition. Now this is taken from the book itself. So state is nothing but a political governance structure of a country, and the market is nothing but all the private economic structures that facilitates production and exchange in an economy. But now look at the definition of a community, right? So a community or a societal pillar is a social group of any size whose members reside in a specific locality, share government, and often have a common cultural and historical heritage. Now, this is one way of defining a community, but if you remember, this over-leveraging of one pillar and that causes an imbalance, right? So how is this happening? So the first one is what either the government has so much control, which is what countries like China does, right? China, Russia, or the markets have so much control, which is free market capitalists like Singapore, Hong Kong, the US. India is somewhere in the middle. So how do you make sure that one of these pillars, right, like Dr. Ramrajan correctly said, like we have to either rebalance one of these pillars, like reduce one and increase the other. But like, what are these pillars that we are talking about, right? Like the macroeconomics equivalent of the state, market, and community is this, right? So capital, labor, and productivity, right? The way for you to produce anything of value, you need capital, labor, and productivity, right? So that are the three pillars from an economic standpoint, right? Which is to define how economies are working. So if you apply the same lens, what is capital? Capital is nothing but the market. The labor is nothing but the state, because you remove all the paraphernalia about with regards to politics, with regards to sociology. If you look at the role of a government, the role of a government is essentially to provide a space where people can thrive and become a productive labor force, right? And the job of the market is essentially to bring in capital to leverage this labor. And how are you doing that? By setting processes so that you are able to measure your productivity and keep optimizing over a period of time, right? So just keep this in mind. We'll come back to this. Now, Raghuram Rajan talked about one type of community, which is, the space-based communities, which is what we call. Now, this is nothing new. Space-based communities has been there for forever. 4,400 years ago, Sangam literature. Sangam literature is a Tamil literature, a collection of poems written and curated together. So where they talk about how these space-based communities had evolved, right? So Kurinji, Mullai, Neidal, Marudam, right? Which essentially is like Kurinji, if you see, the landscape is mountain. Mullai is forest, right? So it's space, and space not in the sense that we know right now. That's more like broader sense, right? But what are the other ways we can define a community, right? So the other way is essentially to look at it from a skill perspective. Now, why would this make sense? Because like I said, capital labor. So if you have to rebalance this whole like equation, then if capital is over leveraged, we have to either like bring labor to the same level, or we have to reduce the over leveraging of capital or accumulation of capital, and then like bring more strength to the labor factor, right? So the unit of labor is skill, right? So that's from an economic standpoint. But let's look at it purely from a human or like anthropological perspective. Our forefathers were called hunters and gatherers, right? And that's the skill that they had at that point in time. And then slowly you domesticate fire, you domesticate wheat, plants essentially, then you become an agrarian society. And what's the skill over there? You're an agriculturist. Then technology comes along, wheel invented, steam engines, then you come to the industrial age, right? So at the industrial age, again, like different types of skills evolve. Now, then like late 80s, then internet revolution comes along. So then you have new sets of skills again. Now, one of the communities that we are building is quantum. So if you look at quantum now, the kind of job descriptions that we have over here are very different compared to the traditional technology-based skills that we are talking about, right? So, and this is a very logical way of looking at things as well. Same thing has been given in our Vedas as well, like 4 different types. We all know this. I mean, at least Indians know this: Shudras, Vaisyas, Kshatriyas, and Brahmins. And even people who belong to, like the Dalits and scheduled tribes, though they were not part of this 4 varnas that was given to them, they in turn went and created groups among themselves based on the skill, right? What you see over there at the bottom, the Irula, Badaga, Toda, Koda, and Kurumbas, these are skill-based communities in a space called Kotagiri near Ooty, right? So what I'm trying to say is communities are very different ways of communities exist, right? What Raghuram Rajan talked about with respect to space-based communities, there are skill-based communities, time immemorial, and there are other new age communities that are happening, right? Like language-based communities, religion, sexual preferences-based games, like the kids now who are using the kinds of Discord and Steemit and whatnot, they form their own communities, right? So sticking to the older definition of communities being this social group, like specific locality, that doesn't make any sense, because the internet has kind of like made space accessible to everyone, right? So skill-based communities has been there. Even if you look at it from an economic standpoint, it's better to create a skill-based ecosystem first and then build everything on top of that, right? Because it makes proper sense, because capital, labor, and productivity, capital, we all know what's happening over there. It's over leveraging of capital that leads to capital accumulation, right? Capitalism per se is not bad, and everyone knows that. So if capitalism is bad, it's like the first order thought process. If you drill down deeper, it's capital accumulation that's the problem. And capital accumulation happens can we stop people from annotating on the screen? Guys, please don't do that. Okay. Right, so labor, right? Skill-based communities put together becomes the labor component in the macroeconomic function that we are talking about, right? So if you're thinking about creating a new age economy, then you have to think about a frictionless skill movement platform, right? Like we have seen platforms like Amazon, Swiggy's, and Ubers of the world that has made movement frictionless, right? It could be movement of people from one place to another, which is what Uber did. It could be movement of anything else, goods, right? That's what Amazon did. So if you have to think about, bringing back the labor component into the mainstream discussion, then you have to think about a frictionless skill movement platform, right? Without the downside of the current system. We'll come to that in a bit, right? So if you're thinking about a frictionless skill movement platform, what's the unit? The unit is skill. So how do you, if you have to represent that skill, because it's going to be a digital platform, so you have to be able to represent skills in a digital way. So for that, you have to like go all the way back to see how we have always represented skill over the ages, right? So when we were hunters and gatherers, the first image that you see over there, it's taken from a movie called Apocalypto by Mel Gibson. So this movie, where people were hunters and gatherers, the movie is completely about that. basically you had body scars and markings to show what your skill level was, right? If you see the movie closely, when a guy kills a boar, he gets a scar on his tummy. When he kills a lion, he gets a scar on his chest, right? And it's again validated by the community, right? So body scars and markings were essentially a representation of the skill that you had. The more marks that you had, the better skilled person you are, right? Which means it gives the ability for you to take decision on behalf of your community, right? Now, the second thing, we became a little evolved, right? Even at that stage, people from scars, they went a little ahead and they were able to wear the kills around their necks, right? Like the tooth of a saber-toothed lion and stuff like that, right? So it became a little outside the body. Then it becomes one level outside the body, which is the badges and medals that the militaries kind of brought into practice, right? Then you had this whole thing of paper-based resumes, which started with Leonardo da Vinci writing it down, sending it across. So that kind of became the first representation of resume. From there, we have evolved all the way to LinkedIn, right? But the problem with that is you can say whatever you want on LinkedIn, right? No one really knows what you say, what you claim is right or wrong. And this in turn has a lot of impact in terms of market and in terms of the state. So the market impact is pretty, like you see over there. There's a certain cost that you can put to that. Like if you look at background verification companies as a proxy to measure the impact of fake resumes and fake CVs, then it's like 3,000 crore just in India, right? But the state impact is even more, right? So in 2010, the Nobel Prize for Economics went to three professors who came out with a model called the DMP model, which is essentially to measure search frictions in the labor market and how it relates to unemployment, right? And the core of that search friction is essentially me having a fake CV, right? If I have a fake CV, if I say I'm Moses Sampal, and I say I studied at Harvard and I have like a master's at Stanford and whatnot, for you to even verify that, like there's a friction that keeps getting added on top of that, right? So the multiple frictions over there, like verification, validation, search and match, onboarding and exit frictions, right? The core of everything is you not having a pre-vetted and pre-verified skill identity, right? So I hope this is clear, right? So we talked about communities, but then Raghuram Rajan talked about space-based communities. We are talking about starting with skill-based communities because skill has been like the best way to measure a person's value or identity. And then we talk about what are the current issues with the skill identity that we are trying to represent in a digital space, because we are essentially thinking about a frictionless skill movement platform. So for that to work frictionlessly, then you have to have a pre-verified skill identity, right? So that's the stream of thought. Now, I said we start with skill identity, right? But not everyone is just going to stick to that. Like you are much more than the skill that you bring to the table, right? And you're much more than getting optimized just for money, right? So that's where our Bharat Inclusion research comes in, where we look at how do you model the well-being of a gig worker, right? A gig worker is essentially who is trying to, move his skill on a platform, right? So he becomes this person who we are trying to optimize for. Everything that we are going to build has to optimize for an individual person. If it gets optimized for an individual person, it gets optimized for the community or the cooperative that I'm part of, right? So we look at the unit level. The unit level here is a person. So the entry point, the top layer that you see is the gig worker skill identity. But that skill identity gives, and for you to optimize for your overall well-being, you should be able to optimize along three levels, right? So you should be able to make money, which is your financial well-being. You should be mentally happy or mentally stable. That's mental well-being. And then there is the physical well-being as well, because that in turn is tied to everything else that you're trying to do, right? You could have amazing skill, but if you're not able to get out of your bed because you're depressed or because you're not able to walk because you're whatever reason that could be, right? So you fix at all these three levels, which is physical, mental, and financial well-being. But for a person to optimize for his financial, for any of these well-being, it's always better to do it in groups, right? If I want to learn something, I would like to learn it with my friends. That's where colleges came into the picture, right? If I want to work out, instead of having a personal gym, I would go to a space and I can work out over there, right? So you to optimize and do it at a consistent level, having this group of people around the same interest, right? It could be skill, it could be mental health related communities, or it could be health related communities, or it could be the space-based communities that Raghuram Rajan is talking about, right? Because this is all tied together. If the locality in which I'm living is not taken care of, right? Like it should be taken care of as well. So that if you put all these things together, me being upskilling, right? Like that data being captured, and my physical well-being, whatever I'm doing to improve my physical well-being, that is being captured. And whatever I'm doing to make sure that I'm a mentally well person, that is also being captured. And this all gets added to my reputation score. And that reputation score in turn opens up the financial services, which are usually not open to gig workers, right? Even though if you're a knowledge worker and you're earning in like thousands of dollars a month, you're still not able to get a loan or like a credit card and stuff like that, at least in India, because like there's no, the typical employer-employee relationship, and that agreement is not there. So you're not kicked out of the typical financial services ecosystem, right? Now, it's interesting to note that, organizations like SEWA, Self-Employed Women's Association of India, now when they started this SEWA bank, they used to look at people's color of the teeth, right? Just to make sure that this person is not a smoker, this person is not a drug addict. And where that does come from, it's essentially, going into your physical well-being path, right? Even if you don't have a skill, your body is well, and you're in a proper mental state, you should have some kind of a credit system, right? Like someone should be able to give you money. But that won't happen in the current system, because our current system is based on credit history that comes out of financial transactions, right? So what we are trying to, the way we are modeling this entire thing is, of course, financial transactions are important, but there are also other aspects, right? So that's what we are trying to build. And the questionnaire that we sent out to this 200 gig workers initially, so we'll be talking to 4,000 gig workers in total. But right now we have done 200, and we'll be sharing a few of the emerging insights that's coming out of that as well, right? So the questionnaire is asking people around all these things. I understand, like Maslow's theory of, hierarchy of needs and other things, but like for them to even think that, hey, I shouldn't be driving my car for 14 hours. It's the responsibility of the government, or like the responsibility of the market, to pay for my backaches because I'm riding for like 16 hours a day, right? Which is what Uber did, at least in the initial stages in India, right? So I hope this is clear, right? So skill identity is a good place to start when we talk about communities, but then it should capture or encapsulate all the other aspects of a person as well, because it's important that people are able to optimize for their overall well-being and not just their financial well-being, right? Okay. So next, I'm going to quickly share a few insights from the initial reports that we have gotten. Now, so this question was about how did you survive the current pandemic, right? So few people had savings, but most of them, if you can see, got it from lenders in their own circle for their personal expenses, right? And the second thing, which is the most important part, is if you see, almost 14% of users mentioned that they use chit funds. Now, chit funds, for people who are not aware of it, this is like a small community banking, okay? It's like a household person who collects, let's say, 100 rupee, 200 rupee on a monthly basis, and then he'll be able to give loans against the money that this person is collecting, right? And this is very interesting because this is the most sought after type of financial inclusion that's happening at a very local level, at a community level, right? People usually get it like in their street or in their locality. It never like goes beyond that, right? So community. So this is all giving a proxy to the fact that it's better to have a community-based thing rather than a gig-based economy. Next one. The key insight here is the lack of data portabilities amongst the platforms that the gig workers are working for, right? So if you see here, what's stopping you from switching jobs? And almost like 5% of them said my ratings and documents are with the current employer, right? So if you look at this 35-40% of people who said I'm not looking to switch, then this rating, like this percentage even goes up, right? So what this shows us is like there should be a way for people to port their data between the platforms that they're working for. For example, if I'm driver with Uber platform, right? And my ratings are within Uber platform. And tomorrow I feel that Uber is not treating me fairly and I want to go to Ola, which is the competitor for Uber in India. Now I can't do that. Like, or I'm thinking twice to do that because all the reputation that I've earned by driving for like 16, 18 hours is stuck within one company, which is Uber, right? So this data portability isn't there, though it's my data. Right, so that's this is a good proxy to show why data ownership itself is important. Okay, now the next thing is in case, so this is to think about the fact that when you're working as an individual, you lose your collective bargaining power, right? So this question talked about the first question, the prelude to this question was, do you think someone in your organization was wrongfully terminated, right? And amongst people who said yes, then the next follow-on question was, do you think the organization wrongfully terminated? And if you think that they did like that, then do you think you or your peers had the chance to stand against the organization that wrongfully terminated your friend, right? And look at that, 82% said, they don't have a chance. That's essentially because you work as an individual and you lose out on all the collective bargaining power, right? Okay, so based on the initial model that we looked at and based on the emerging insights that are coming out, we are essentially now thinking about a data distributed co-op or a community platform, right? There's a lot of information here. Let me try to break it down, right? So third pillar, now, if you go by that definition, that it should be a balance between the state and the market, right? And at a macro level, you look at it as, the capital, labor, and productivity. So the equivalent of that in a micro level, which is, at an enterprise level, typically in microeconomics, because we are trying to create a new economic stream per se, right? That's why it's a little over the top, I would say. Okay, so let's try to break it down, right? So when we say it should be a balance between the state and the market, and if the role of the state is to provide productive labor, and the role of the market is to create demand for the labor that the state has produced, then what should be a community look like, or a co-op look like? The co-op or a community can ideally have both the supply and the demand put together. So every circle that you see here is one community, and every box that you see here is a supply side brand and a demand side brand. Okay, I'll explain, I'll take one of these communities in detail and I'll explain in a bit. But this is clearly in alignment with what cooperative's definition stands for, right? A cooperative, at the end of the day, is an autonomous association of persons, so gig workers, united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise, right? This perfectly sums up how this one circle is going to behave, right? And if you put all these multiple circles together, and if you're able to connect them at a very fundamental level, which is the data flow, right? Then it becomes a platform. And how do you make sure that this platform doesn't have the downsides of the current systems? Then it comes to data ownership and split incentives to share data. Now, this is a research done at Stanford where they talked about how do you envision a new big tech platform, right? The current problem is whatever we know, right? Distribution, data goes through the distribution channel. Because the platform owns the distribution channel, think about Amazon, think about Swiggy's. Because they own the distribution channel, you understand the demand far better than anyone in the market. So you'll be able to go and vertically integrate, right? What I mean by that is Amazon Basics, right? Amazon Basics, which started 15 years later than Amazon, because they wanted to see how demand is being generated. And let's say simple things like having a coaster is something very essential for people in their household. Then Amazon Basics will go and create this massive set of coasters and give it to you at 30% lesser rate than the next person who is also on the same platform. So what's happening? The smaller mom and pop shop who came on the platform thinking that they're going to get more business are essentially running out of business because after 5-10 years down the line, right? I hope that's clear. So the problem is with data and the control of the data that's going through the platform. It's very important that we understand this, because unless we understand this, we won't be able to appreciate why data ownership at an individual level is important, and what's the role of this cooperative, which is going to act like a data custodian, because I don't know how to use my data, right? So I trust a community saying that, boss, you take my data, I'm learning, I'm like working with the skills that this particular community is teaching me, but what can this data be used for? This data can be used for giving me proper insurance cover, giving me proper social net, giving me the security, which I would not have gotten if I was working alone, right? So think of that same driver who was working in in Uber, and who was wrongly terminated, and he had like no recourse, right? But if he was part of a driver union, right, then this driver union or this cooperative is going to fight on his behalf, right? I hope that's clear. So the data ownership at an individual level and the data custodians or the cooperatives, that becomes very important to envision a future platform that doesn't have the downsides of the current big tech platforms. Okay, I hope that's clear. We'll answer all these questions once this is done. Okay, so what do we mean by data custodian, and what's the job of the cooperative in terms of data, right? I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. So it's consent management, algorithms management, data location, key and edit. Okay. So what it essentially means is, if you have to really think about a technology platform that provides data ownership to the end user, which means the platform per se doesn't own your, the credentials, the public-private key, which is used to log into a particular platform. So if I own that key, then I can essentially, though I can say in writing that I won't be able to see your data, I can always go back and change your data, I can see your data, right? So the future platform should make sure that doesn't happen, which means the keys, right? The keys are given to the end user, right? But the end users may not be comfortable to store it, right? Like I could lose my key, so they give it to the data cooperative. Now take all this technical jargons out and look at it in a very simple way. So when SEWA, the Self-Employed Women's Association, started their community banking, they wanted people to come and invest or save like 5 rupee a day, 1 rupee a day, something like that, right? And when they were doing that, and that log was getting added into the passbook, right? Now the passbook, think of it like your key, right? Now the passbook, when it was given to the ladies, the husband would see that passbook. He would see, oh, my wife has 100 rupees. Let me go and get like alcohol and get drunk, right? So what these women did was they started giving the passbook back to the bank. That's essentially what I'm trying to say, right? The key management is nothing but, though the platform wants not to own the key, it's giving the keys back to the user, but the user is not comfortable holding that key. So they give back that key to the cooperative. That makes sense? So it becomes a fiduciary duty of the cooperative to make sure that they are ethical and they are legal in terms of handling the data. Okay. Now there are like more nuances over here in terms of algorithms being able to run on only this particular data set and not on the entire data set of the ecosystem. But I think we'll keep that for later. But I hope you get the point, right? So certain type of data stays with the end user, and certain type of data stays with the data cooperative or a community or a cooperative person. Okay. All right. So it's all good. It's good to talk about it. It's good to draw all these diagrams and show that, hey, we have thought about a new way of building an economy. But one, it has to hit the road, and then like we have to see how people are reacting to that, right? So we started building these communities to make sure that whatever our hypotheses were being validated over a period of time, right? So we built like these 4 communities. So one is 2 are based on hard skills. Hard skills are something that's measurable. The market will value for that. Soft skills are a little tougher to measure, and productivity is a entire topic in itself because it's about process setting and making sure you're doing it on a continuous basis. Now, all these communities are built around the same philosophy that we just talked about, right? Which is there is a supply side and there is a demand side. And how is the supply and demand going to talk to each other is through the processes that we are going to set, okay? So I'm going to take one of these communities and I'm going to quickly show how it's going to look like, okay? So if you look at this Mad About Growth as the community, Now, Mad About Growth is a supply side community, which means you're upskilling people, right? So this is the role of a government in a minuscule way. The role of a government is what? To produce productive labor. Now, if you like shrink it down to like one community level, and this community is focused on sales, marketing, strategy, skills. So this community's job on the supply side is to inculcate and grow these skills. And how do you do that? We take in unskilled people and semi or skilled professionals, and then we learn together. So there are multiple ways that we learn: facilitation, peer learning, co-creation in a community setting. And then for your learning to be completed, you essentially have to put it to practice. So that's where performing and practice comes in. Now, where are these jobs coming from, right? You get to work on some real-time gigs or real-time brands to grow, but where are those coming from? That's coming from the demand-side platform which I built, which is called GOD, Growth on Demand. So Growth on Demand essentially acts like a talent agent for the supply that has been created, which is exactly what we do at a macro level, right? When Indian government opened up all these engineering colleges, we had so many engineers. Then TCS, Wipro, Infosys comes along, acts like a talent agent, and then worked on the price differentiation between the Western world and the Eastern world, right? So the demand side always acts like a talent agent for the supply, right? So going by that definition, the GOD platform essentially is gonna close consulting gigs, which means brands that wanna grow, and then splits it and gives it back to the supply side at gigs and apprenticeships. So this is where we are now, bringing in the gig economy, right? So skill identity, which we talked about, which is pre-vetted, and the projects in turn are segregated into gigs and apprenticeships and then supplied back into the pool itself, right? So this becomes this self-sustaining loop of supply and demand working in unison. So this is just, mind you, this is just one community that I'm talking about, right? So similarly, now if you think about quantum computing India, if you think about Stranger Sapiens, you think about Stop Being Boring, and all these things connected together by an underlying blockchain layer, then it becomes the platform that we really want to envision and build for the world, right? I hope that's clear. Okay. So that essentially sums up our discussion. So we are open to question. What we are essentially saying is we don't have all the answers, but we have a damn good hypothesis. All right, thank you. Open to questions now. Right. Just to make sure. All right. Thanks, Mohammed. Just to make sure. So whenever I talked about communities, the definition of cooperative fits perfectly with what we defined as this community as a third pillar, supply and demand put together, right? And that's essentially what the cooperative is. So the hackathon or the Coopathon that we'll be doing is to think about ways to build this new age cooperatives, right? This is something that we were discussing yesterday. So which is to build like the Tesla for cooperatives, right? So that's the goal, because at the end of the day, we all know objectively that this is a better way to go about building an economy. We all knew objectively that electric cars were the future and fossil fuels is not gonna hold up for a long time. But we knew that electric cars were this small soapbox kind of a thing. And then Tesla comes along, flips it open, and then says, it's $250,000. I'm going to give it only to Arnold Schwarzenegger and Leonardo DiCaprio. Suddenly it becomes this aspirational thing where we started looking at electric cars as something that we want to buy, right? So that's in alignment with what Ganesh started off this conversation, which is to have cooperatives or to position cooperatives as this aspirational thing that smart people have to think about doing, right? Like, it's not that you have an idea. It's very easy to build an app, right? So 6-year-old kids are building apps in India, right? White Hat Junior. But the point is, it's very easy to build applications right now, but it's very difficult to bring people together and in a way that that's better for the larger society, right? And if you want more people to do that, then we have to make or build cooperatives or communities which are aspirational, right? That's one of the reasons why all the communities that we are building are like around the white collar skill space, right? Like, it's quantum computing India. So if you're a techie, quantum is like the ultimate level right now to think about, right? So if someone shows that, hey, quantum computing India is a cooperative society that's working on cutting edge technologies, then it becomes suddenly an aspirational thing. The same goes with all the other communities that we're building. All right. Ownership is the most ancient problem since ancient times. In essence, democratic ownership is important, including the terms of data. How do you see that the government has been so heavily co-opted by the capital? Does the ultra-liberal political democracy system still have opportunity for major changes to occur? Yeah, so I mean, I used to think like that, but like Gandhi said, change starts with you. So you flip that, and if you can look at it as, hey, I want to own my data, and if someone is giving the opportunity for you to own your data, support that person. That's all I would say. Right, like it's very easy to think at this top level. Even the DEPA Data Empowerment Act that's going to come out in India by December, though they claim that or data localization and stuff like not really. At the end of the day, it's going to go to Adani Enterprises who will be setting up data centers across the country. You know what I mean? So it's very important. And there's a book called India Grows at Night. Please read that. So it talks about how India is a bottom-up country, right? Because we are so big, it's very important that we start looking at it from the bottom up. How do you see the possibility of bringing about change in the coalition of the developed countries also looks so strong? Yeah, these are like too big of a question. I don't have answers to that. Yeah.
It's a very tricky question to answer, I think.
Sorry?
We missed one question in between. How do we make it more inclusive for marginalized groups? Will there be a vision to make it more inclusive?
Right. Great.
That's a relevant and important question, in fact.
Yeah. This is a very relevant question. So we get asked all these questions again and again. So the answer to that is, the model that we are proposing may not be the right model for every type of community or every type of skill-based labor also. And we hope that when the aspirational communities are set, more people will start thinking about the problems that they care about, and they start building communities around the problems that they care about, right? So I'm sure there should be an answer to that. If we put thoughts into that, we'll get it. But right now, I haven't thought about it, right? So the person or the people who are coming together to bring the community together, it's really in their hands, right? This is the other side of this whole data ownership thing, right? Because you have to give out control also. You have to give out decision-making power also to the community. So you can't centrally control saying, no, you should follow all these things, right? A broad framework is good. A broad framework is good. But how they manage within the communities and make sure that decisions are happening at a faster rate, and what type of people that they let into the community and for what, those things will stay at within the community level itself, and it will make more sense because they know the intricacies of that particular community than we looking at it from 100 communities and 1,000 communities level, right?
In fact, that's where the role of data cooperatives as data fiduciaries also come in. They have the responsibility to give that security, data security to its members, right, and withhold information and give on the basis of what the individual choice is. So the individual choice and liberty is protected in that sense. And I think this is where we can go back to what you had earlier said in that in your presentation. So I think that also makes a little more sense, where even for marginalized groups or inclusion or access to credit, this is where the entire concept of data and cooperatives, that linkage will come. So this in turn or inherently brings in inclusion. So I think you had also mentioned that in your presentation earlier to answer Mr. Sebanti Chatterjee. And I think one more question we have received. I am a techie and interested to know where and how you're willing to use blockchain here.
So, okay, good point. So the skill identity or the network layer is a blockchain, okay? So all the nodes or all the communities or all the rounds that I showed in the diagram are essentially nodes when you look at it from a blockchain perspective, right? So which means you're localizing data to that particular community, and they'll be running a full node of blockchain of our, So every every hour that you send within a particular community, that is logged and that is validated by the community members, gets added to the blockchain. So it becomes this immutable log of your skill transactions. Does it make sense, Siddharth?
Yes, it does. Yes. One more thing that I was willing to understand here was, in the sense, are you willing to work on a private blockchain structure or a democratized public blockchain structure? Because the data that we're talking about is going to be stored somewhere, right? And what is the plan of storing that data? Where are we actually willing to store that data? I remember the point when you stated about the passbook that Seva was using, and that passbook was again shared back to the financial institution. So in this case, obviously, if you're talking about blockchain, I'm very much interested to know how you're decentralizing the data, because when it's centralized, there is always scope of corruption, no matter what kind of an organization it may be. Yeah.
Very nice. Very good question. So we'll be using a private blockchain. It's called Hyperledger Fabric, if you are aware of that. This is by Linux Foundation, open source. So we use Hyperledger Fabric, and then we have forked Hyperledger Fabric to create a private blockchain network. And the other question with respect to storage, we use something called IPFS, Interplanetary File System.
Yes, yes, I'm aware of that. My point being, like, I was talking about the network structure here. So if you're creating a private blockchain, where is the data being stored? Because then in this case, what you're suggesting is, if you work on a private blockchain, then there would be a lot of nodes to be taken care of in comparison with the public blockchain. So in this case, is the data being managed by some sort of a non-profit organization, or is it that data is being managed by individual people who are participating?
Both, actually, both. So the individual people will be running a light node, and the communities or the cooperatives will be running a full node. Okay, and there'll be a non-profit foundation which will be a consortium, blockchain consortium, right?
Understood. Okay, sure. That sounds great. I would have more questions, but I think I can bother them later on.
Yes.
I'm interested in this whole scenario. Thank you very much for your time.
Very nice. All right. Thanks for those nice questions. Yeah. Is the path for political unity radically worth taking into account? Like, for example, pushing the ICA to become a political platform open to everyone. Ganesh, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think Suroto has written another detailed question about data democratization. How do you think about seeing strong market domination co-opting the state and civil society? The state and civil society should be working together at all times. Wherever the state cannot fill in, the civil society should. And that is the context where the third pillar comes into play. And the strength of the third pillar depends on the strength of communities. It is always a bottoms-up approach and a strength of the individual. The wolf and the pack go together, rather. So the communities are what is most important. And in fact, many of the countries in the global south, developing countries like India, Indonesia, all these countries, we've seen so many examples all over Africa where communities have been able to find creative solutions where governments have not even been able to access remote stretches and reaches of our countries. So that is the importance of what civil society should be, we should be stressing on. Is the path of political unity radically worth taking into account? Of course, political unity always does a lot of good, political will, political unity. But unfortunately, the world, each and every country, if you take the case of India as well, it's a very diverse nation. It's a nation of nations, rather. So to bring everyone together is no simple and small job, which is where communities again come into the fore. Each and every smaller community creates collectives for themselves that cater for their own needs. So I go back to the same old point that even Moses was stressing on. See, leveraging technology is the solution in today's age. But for hundreds of years, they have been doing this with or without cooperatives. Cooperatives in the last 100 plus years, they have been very resilient structures. Even before that, if you look at so many countries across the world, look at the island countries, for examples that we were studying recently, traditional values and traditional communities, based on those values, they have groupings which have been strong, and they have still remained after the test of time. They still remain till date. And why? Because they are deeply rooted in their own culture, which is where the value of collectives, not just cooperatives, any sort of collectives come into play. And like using a like example, pushing ICA to become a political platform open to everyone, I don't think I have an answer to that. So I'm just going to skip that one. Next, one more question from Siddharth Mohan. You mentioned it is a great hypothesis. Is that this product is in ideation and structural stage, or have you already developed a beta version already? That is for Moses.
And, I've responded to all those, yeah.
Right, private beta is ready. All right. So I think we can wind up. I leave the floor to my colleague Shivali, who would make the closing remarks.
Yeah, can you also put up the hackathon sign up page link?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Nice, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Ganesh. So I would like to thank our speakers, Mr. Moses and Mr. Joe from Bharat Inclusion Initiative, for this very interesting talk, and also our co-organizers, our partners, ICOPIN, and to you all for joining us for this session. So Tesla for Co-ops concept that very rightly conveys our vision, our idea behind Coopathon initiative as well. This is what we are trying to achieve. This is what we are aiming to get through this Coopathon initiative. And I would like to also take this opportunity to share with you all that the Coopathon initiative is from 11th to 14th of December. The 72-hour event also has a lot of other such interesting sessions planned. So we would encourage you all to join us for the event, and the registrations are open till 30th of November. So it will be, my colleague is going to post the registration link in the chat box. We'll request all of you to visit the page and also help us spread the word about the event. That's it. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Right. Thank you, Moses.
Thank you, Moses, and
thank you, Ganesh, and Shivali.
Thank you all. Thank you for the.
I'm sorry, my question is maybe it's not relevant for you, Moses.
No, it's not. I mean, it could go on for hours. I mean, I don't have a simple answer. That's my thing, you know.
Thank you, Ganesh, for your answer. It's a nice answer, and I hope ICA could be as a very important roles in the future for young people like you.
Absolutely, that's what we're trying to do, Suroto. I mean,
Suroto will like initiate for the cooperative party here.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So that question may be related to that.
Okay.
And I hope you support our movement here in Indonesia, and I really appreciate for Coopathon like a movement. And in our future, I think political situation will be should be changed, and I know, and in the permanent changing should be come from evolution, is not revolution, and that is mean cooperative paths or cooperative way. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. But I get your point, because when I was talking to Tribor, the platform co-op founder, he said the same thing. Because you're going to be working with people, because you're going to be working with labor and in large scale, you essentially will end up doing, in this realm of entering in the political side, right?
Yes.
Either you're going to enter that, or you're going to like get in tussles with the political parties. right? So if you guys haven't read the book, We Are Poor But So Many, which is a book about Seva Foundation, which is also a cooperative. It's very nicely written how the founder Ella Butt, like she was able to, like traverse between these political parties, especially she's working with like 1.8 million women workers in India, right? Like, so imagine the power of that. So all political parties in India want her approval, or they are like trying to, now they want her approval. When she was starting out, they were trying to like, shut her off, right? So if you read the book, like all she has like mentioned very nicely, how she was able to like come out of each of these situations. And one situation and one solution, of course, could be starting a political party itself. Great, you are doing that. Yeah, if we can help in any way, do let us know. Yeah.
Thank you, Moses.
All right, thank you.
All right, so I think let's wind up. Thanks everyone for joining. I strongly encourage all of you to please visit our website, www.coopathon.coop, and encourage you to spread the word for registrations for the Coopathon. Again, reminding it is from 11 to 14 December.